She hid inside a delivery box to escape her stepfather. Vampire King opened it and said, "You're home now." The box smelled like cardboard and packing tape and faintly of the cleaning solution the warehouse used on its floors, and Ivy Marsh had been folded inside it for 11 hours when it finally stopped moving. She didn't know that for sure. She'd lost track somewhere after the 3rd hour, when her legs went from cramped to numb to something that didn't have a word, and after that time stopped being a thing she measured and became a thing she just survived. She knew it was dark. She knew there'd been a truck, the rumble of a highway, then city streets, stop and go, then nothing for a long stretch, then movement again, shorter, like someone carrying it. She'd written the label herself 3 days ago in a font she'd practiced to make it look professional. Fragile, handle with care. Voss Holdings, attention receiving department. She didn't know if it even took deliveries like this. She'd found the name on a building downtown her stepfather always talked about, with fear and resentment. And when you were 19 and out of options, important sounded like safe. It hadn't been a good plan. She knew that even while she was doing it. But her stepfather had broken her phone 2 days before, had started locking the back door at night so she couldn't leave the house without going past his bedroom, had said the thing on Tuesday that made it very clear what was coming next if she stayed, and she didn't have money for a bus far enough away, and she didn't have anyone to call who wouldn't call him first, so she'd climbed into a box at a friend's apartment, a friend who worked at a packing facility and owed her a favor and didn't ask enough questions, and she'd let herself be sealed into cardboard and put on a truck. It was, she would later admit, an insane idea. It was also the only idea she had. The box was set down. She heard footsteps move away, then come back, multiple sets, voices low and unconcerned, the ordinary sounds of people receiving a shipment. Then, a pause, longer than the others. Then a voice, low and even, said something she couldn't quite make out, and the footsteps that had moved away came back. Faster this time. She heard the tape being cut. A clean, precise sound, like someone who knew exactly where the seam was without needing to look for it. Light came in first, gray and ordinary, warehouse light, fluorescent and flat. Then the flaps opened and she squinted up into it and saw a face looking down at her, and her first thought, absurdly, was that he was the most still person she had ever seen. Not frozen, just still in a way that suggested he didn't need to move unless he chose to. He had dark hair pushed back from his face, longer than she expected for someone in a suit that fit like it had been made for exactly his shoulders. His eyes were pale, almost colorless. The kind of eyes that made you forget what you were about to say. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back, because she didn't have the energy to do anything else, curled into a space that had not been designed for a human body, blinking against the light. "You're home now," he said. It was such a strange thing to say that for a second she thought she'd misheard him. "What?" Her voice came out as a croak. 11 hours without water did that. He didn't repeat himself. He crouched down, which put him at eye level with the box, and he held out one hand, palm up, not grabbing, just offering. "Can you move your legs?" "I don't know." "Try." She tried. Pain went through both knees like something electric, and she made a sound she wasn't proud of. He didn't react to the sound the way she expected, didn't flinch or look uncomfortable. He just reached in, careful, and got an arm under her shoulders and lifted her out of the box like she weighed nothing at all, which she was fairly sure wasn't possible, because she definitely weighed something. The warehouse around her came into focus slowly. Other workers had stopped, were watching from a respectful distance, the way people watched something they didn't fully understand but knew not to interrupt. He set her down on a stack of pallets and crouched in front of her again. "Water," he said, to no one in particular, and someone produced a bottle so fast it was like they'd been holding it ready the whole time. She drank. Her hands shook doing it. "Who are you?" she managed. "Caspian Voss." He said it like it was a fact she'd asked for, nothing more. "This is my building. You shipped yourself to my receiving dock." "I know. I'm sorry." "I didn't." She stopped, because her throat was doing something embarrassing, something that meant she was about to cry in front of a stranger in a warehouse, and she hadn't let herself cry in front of anyone in 2 years. "I didn't know where else to go." He was quiet for a moment, watching her with those pale, unreadable eyes. "Why here?" "My stepfather talks about this place. Voss Holdings. He's scared of it. Or scared of you, I guess, now that I know there's a you." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, furious at herself. "I figured anything that scared him had to be safer than staying with him." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite a smile. Something more careful than that. "What's his name?" he said. "Your stepfather." "Why does that matter?" "It matters." He said it simply, without explaining further, and something about the flatness of his voice made her believe that whatever was happening behind his face was not nothing. "Daniel Reyes," she said. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. He stood, looked at the box she'd been folded into for 11 hours, looked at the workers still hovering at a careful distance, and said something quiet to one of them that she didn't catch. The worker nodded and moved off fast. "You're going to need a doctor," he said, turning back to her. "Your legs. Possibly your circulation. I'm not asking, I'm telling you, because you'll argue otherwise. I don't have insurance. You don't need it here." She stared at him. "I don't even know what here is." He considered that. "Fair," he said. "Let's start with somewhere that isn't a loading dock." They put her in a room on the 4th floor that didn't look like an office at all. Soft lighting, real cushions on the couch, a window with actual daylight instead of fluorescent glare. A woman with kind, tired-looking eyes checked her legs, pressed gently on her calves, asked her to wiggle her toes, said the circulation would come back fully in a day or two, but she'd been lucky. Another few hours might have been different. Ivy sat through all of it feeling strange, dislocated, like she'd fallen asleep on a bus and woken up somewhere that didn't match the place she'd fallen asleep in. Caspian came back once the doctor left. He'd taken off his jacket. His sleeves were rolled to his forearms, and she noticed, in the unhelpful way her brain noticed things at the worst times, that his forearms were exactly as still and precise looking as the rest of him. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Confused. That's reasonable." He sat down across from her, not too close, the careful distance of someone who understood that she didn't know him and didn't owe him comfort with her body just because he'd opened a box. "I had someone look into your stepfather while the doctor was with you." She felt her stomach tighten. "Already? It doesn't take long when you know where to look." "And?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was deciding how much to say. "He has a record. 2 arrests. No convictions. Both for things that match what I'm guessing happened to you." She didn't say anything. Her hands were in her lap, twisting at the hem of her shirt, an old habit she'd never managed to break. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you what I found, because you should know I'm not operating blind." "Why do you care?" she said. It came out sharper than she meant. "I'm nobody. I shipped myself in a box because I was desperate, and you happen to be the name on the building. You don't owe me anything." "No," he agreed. "I don't." "Then why?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because someone folded themselves into a box for 11 hours rather than spend one more night under that man's roof," he said. "That tells me everything I need to know about what was happening in that house. I don't need you to explain it. I need you to be somewhere safe while you figure out what comes next." She felt her eyes burn again. She pressed the heel of her hand against them, hard, willing it to stop. "I don't cry," she said, mostly to herself. "You can hear. I don't want to. All right." He didn't push. He just sat there, steady, letting her have the moment without making it bigger than it was. After a while, she got it under control. She looked at him properly for the first time since the warehouse, took in the details she'd missed in the panic and the light. He looked young, maybe early 30s if she had to guess, but there was something underneath that didn't track with 30. Something in the way he held himself, like he'd been holding himself that exact way for a very long time, and had stopped noticing it cost effort. "What are you?" she said. The question surprised even her. It just came out, unfiltered, the way things did when you were too exhausted to manage your own mouth. He didn't pretend not to understand. "What do you think I am?" "I don't know. You moved that box like it weighed nothing. You found out everything about my stepfather in 20 minutes. Your eyes do something weird in this light." She looked at him steadily, too tired to be afraid of the answer. "Just tell me." "I'm a vampire," he said. Flat, simple, like he was telling her his job title. She absorbed that. Strangely, it didn't feel like the biggest piece of information she'd received that day. The biggest piece had been, "You're home now," said by a stranger who had no reason to mean it, and somehow had said it like he did. "Okay," she said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Okay, I just spent 11 hours in a cardboard box to escape my stepfather. I don't have a lot of room left for being scared of new things today." She pulled her knees up onto the couch, careful of the ache still there. "Are you going to hurt me?" "No." "Are you going to feed off me?" "No." "Are you going to make me do anything I don't want to do?" "No." He said it without any defensiveness, just clean and certain. "You can leave whenever you choose. Today, tomorrow, next week. The door isn't locked. I'm not interested in being another version of what you ran from." She studied him. There was something in the directness of it that she wasn't used to, something that didn't have an angle hidden behind it the way most things people said to her did. "Why'd you open the box yourself?" she asked. "You're clearly important. Don't you have people for receiving deliveries?" He was quiet for a second. "I felt something wrong before it was opened," he said. "I can't explain it better than that. A heartbeat where there shouldn't have been one. I came down because it didn't add up. That's a strange superpower. It's been useful." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, the first thing close to a smile she'd seen from him. Mostly for finding things people are trying to hide. Apparently also for finding people. She almost smiled back. "Almost what happens now," she said. "Now you rest. There's a room down the hall, real bed, real door that locks from your side only. Food whenever you want it. No questions you don't want to answer." He stood, smoothing down a sleeve that didn't need smoothing. "Tomorrow, we figure out the rest." The rest meaning what? Meaning whatever you need it to mean. He looked at her steadily. "Lawyers, if you want them. Distance, if you need it. A new city, a new name, whatever it takes to make sure he can't reach you again." She stared at him. "You're offering me all of that for a stranger who arrived in a box?" "Yes, that's insane." "Probably," he agreed. "I've been called worse." She didn't sleep that first night. Not really. She lay in the unfamiliar bed in the unfamiliar room and listened to the building breathe around her, vents and pipes, and the distant hum of a city she didn't know yet. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw the inside of the box, the dark folded shape of it, and her body would jolt awake again like it didn't believe she was actually out. Around 3 a.m, she gave up trying and went looking for water. The hallway outside her room was quiet, dim lighting, the kind of low, warm glow that made a building feel inhabited rather than empty. She found a small kitchen area at the end of the hall and was filling a glass when she heard a voice behind her. "You're not sleeping." She turned. Caspian was standing in the doorway, not dressed for bed exactly, in soft, dark clothes that looked more comfortable than the suit, but still somehow precise. "Do you sleep?" she asked, mostly to deflect. "Not the way you do." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He came in, leaned against the counter at a careful distance, the same distance he'd kept all day, like he was deliberately mapping out a space she could trust. "I rest." "Different mechanism. I don't dream the way you would." "Lucky you," she said. "My dreams are mostly cardboard right now." He was quiet for a moment. "That'll fade." "Will it?" "Eventually. It did for someone else I knew." Took a while. Something passed behind his eyes, brief and old, like a door opening on a room he didn't visit often. "It does fade." She looked at him over the rim of her glass. "Someone else you knew. A long time ago." He said it like a door closing again, gently, not slammed. Not tonight's conversation. She let it go. She was too tired to push, and something about the way he'd said it made her think pushing wouldn't get her anywhere anyway. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You've been asking me things all day." Different kind of question. She set the glass down. "Did you mean it? When you opened the box and said I was home now? Or was that just a thing you say to calm people down?" He looked at her steadily. The kitchen light was low, soft on his face, and for once he didn't look quite as unreadable as he had in the warehouse. "I don't say things I don't mean," he said. "It's inefficient. I'd rather say nothing." "That's not really an answer either." "I meant it," he said. "I don't know yet what it means, fully, but I meant it when I said it." She nodded slowly, not sure what to do with that, deciding not to do anything with it right now because it was 3 a.m. and her legs still ached and the whole day had been too much to process in real time. "I should try to sleep," she said. "You should." She turned to go, then stopped at the doorway. "Caspian, yes, thank you. For opening the box yourself, for not just letting it sit there." Something in his face shifted, small but real. "You're welcome," he said. "Go to sleep, Ivy." It was the first time he'd used her name. She hadn't even realized she'd given it to him until she heard it back, and it landed somewhere strange in her chest, something that felt like being seen rather than just processed. She slept, eventually, better than she expected. The next few days moved in a blur of small adjustments. A doctor visit, a lawyer visit, paperwork about her stepfather that she signed with hands that only shook a little. Caspian wasn't there for all of it. He had a building to run, a company that did something with imports and logistics that she still didn't fully understand, but he checked in every evening, sitting across from her in that same careful distance, asking how things had gone, listening more than talking. On the 4th day, she asked him directly, "What do you actually do here? The company. What is it really?" He considered the question. "Officially, international logistics. Shipping, warehousing, customs, brokerage." He paused. "Unofficially, it's a cover for moving things that need moving quietly. People, sometimes. Information, more often. There's a network of us, scattered across cities, who help people get out of situations they can't get out of through normal channels. People like me. People exactly like you." He looked at her steadily. "You weren't the first person to arrive here in a box. You're the first to arrive in one without knowing that was the system." She blinked. "Wait, there's an actual system for shipping yourself out of bad situations?" "There's a whisper network. Underground. Careful. Deliberately hard to find, unless you need it. Your stepfather's fear of this building wasn't paranoia. People who've needed to disappear, have disappeared through here before. She sat with that. And I just stumbled into it. You stumbled into it because you were desperate and clever enough to use the one piece of information you had. He almost smiled again. That's not luck. That's instinct. She felt something warm move through her chest, something she didn't have a clean name for yet. I didn't even know it was a real plan. I just thought, anything is better than another night in that house. That's how most good instincts start, he said, not knowing they're good yet. 2 weeks in, she started helping in the warehouse. Just small things at first, sorting inventory, learning the layout, because sitting in a room being looked after was starting to feel worse than helpful. Caspian didn't argue when she asked. He just had someone show her where things went and let her find her own rhythm. She was good at it, it turned out. Methodical. She liked the simple physical logic of putting things in order, liked that nothing in a warehouse asked her how she was feeling or wanted her to explain herself. She liked, more than she expected, working close enough to occasionally cross paths with Caspian during the day, brief exchanges that built slowly into something that felt less like gratitude and more like familiarity. "You're frowning at that palette," he said one afternoon, appearing beside her without the sound of footsteps that should have announced him. "It's labeled wrong." Someone wrote the destination code backward. Does that happen often? More than you'd think. She fixed the label, satisfied with the small correction. People get tired. Mistakes happen. He watched her work for a moment. "You like this?" "I like that it makes sense," she said. "Everything in my life before this didn't make sense. This makes sense. A box goes here because it's supposed to go here. Nobody's mood decides that." Something in his face softened, the way it did sometimes when she said something he wasn't expecting. "I understand that," he said. "More than you'd think." "Do you?" "I've spent a long time building systems that make sense. Logistics, routes, networks that work the same way regardless of who's having a bad day." He looked at the warehouse around them, the orderly rows. "It's a kind of peace." She studied him. "How long have you been doing this? The helping people thing?" He considered the question. "Long enough that I've stopped counting in years. I count in people instead. It's a better measure. How many people? Enough that I've lost an exact number. More than I expected to be able to help when I started." She wanted to ask how long he'd been alive, the bigger unspoken question that had been sitting under all their conversations since the kitchen at 3 a.m, but something in his expression made her hold off. Not yet, she thought. Let it come when it comes. That evening he found her on the building's rooftop, where she'd taken to going after work, because it had a clear view of the city and the air felt less crowded with other people's history. "You found the good spot," he said, joining her at the railing. "Quiet up here." "It is." He looked out at the skyline rather than at her, giving her the space she'd come to recognize as deliberate. "Your lawyer called today. Wanted me to pass on that the restraining order went through without contest." She felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized was still tight. He didn't fight it? He tried. It didn't matter. The evidence was clear enough that fighting it just made things worse for him. Caspian glanced at her. "You're safe from him. Legally and otherwise." "Otherwise meaning what?" "Meaning I made it clear, separately, that further contact would not be tolerated." His voice was even, controlled, but there was something underneath it that she'd started to recognize as the part of him that wasn't entirely human, the part that had decided something and would not be moved from it. "What did you say to him?" Enough that he understood the conversation was not negotiable. She looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. Why did you?" He turned to face her fully, and in the evening light his pale eyes looked less unreadable than they had that first day in the warehouse. "Because you spent 11 hours in a box rather than risk one more conversation with him," he said. "Because some debts don't need to be explained to be paid. Is that what this is?" A debt. No, he said it simply. Immediately. This is something else. I just don't have the right word for it yet either. She felt her pulse pick up, the particular kind of nervousness that had nothing to do with fear. You said that before, about not having the word yet. I say true things even when they're incomplete, he said. It seemed important you know that, given everything else you've had to navigate with incomplete information. She almost laughed. That's a very controlled way to almost say something. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, real amusement this time, rare and warm. I've had a long time to learn control, he said. It's a habit I'm finding harder to keep around you. The city hummed below them, distant and indifferent. She felt the wind move her hair, felt the strange, settled feeling of standing somewhere high with someone who made the height feel less precarious rather than more. I'm not in a place to figure out what this is, she said honestly. Not yet. Everything is still too new. I just got out of one thing. I don't want to walk straight into another thing before I know who I am without him controlling everything. That's wise, Caspian said. I'm not asking you to figure it out tonight. I'm not asking you to figure it out this year. If that's what it takes, you'd wait that long. I've waited considerably longer for considerably less, he said, and there was something dry and almost funny under the words, the centuries showing briefly at the edges. A year is not a long time to me. It might be a very long time to you. We don't have to move at the same speed. She looked at him, this strange, steady creature, who had opened a box on a loading dock and changed the entire shape of her life with 4 words. And she thought, not for the first time, that whatever this was, it didn't feel like the danger she'd spent her whole life learning to watch for. Okay, she said. We don't have to move at the same speed. He nodded, like that settled something important, and they stood together at the railing while the city turned its lights on below them, one window at a time. Spring came to the city the way it did everywhere, slow and uncertain, and Ivy found herself 6 months into a life she hadn't planned, working full days in the warehouse that had become more home to her than any building she'd lived in before, and spending most evenings on the roof with Caspian, talking about things that had nothing to do with her stepfather, or the box, or any of the things that had brought her there. She learned things about him slowly, the way you learned a language by living in it, rather than studying it. He'd built the company 200 years ago, under a different name. He'd helped build similar networks in 3 other cities before this one. He didn't talk about his past directly, but pieces came out sideways, in jokes that referenced decades she couldn't place, in habits that didn't make sense for someone who looked 30. She told him things too. About her mother, who died when she was 12 and left her with a stepfather who'd been a different person before that, or maybe had always been this person and just hidden it well. About the years after, learning to be invisible in her own house, learning which sounds meant trouble and which didn't. He listened the way he did everything, completely, without performing sympathy he didn't feel or rushing to fix things that didn't need fixing in that moment, just listened. I used to think being invisible was a skill, she told him one evening, sitting on the rooftop with her knees pulled up. Like I'd mastered something. Being small enough that no one noticed me on a bad night. It's a skill, Caspian said. Just one that costs more than it's worth. What did it cost you? Whatever skill you mastered to survive, whatever you survived. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city lights. Distance, he said finally. I got very good at keeping things at a distance. People, mostly, it took me a long time to understand that distance and safety aren't the same thing. And now I have a person who shipped herself to my loading dock in a cardboard box, he said, and there was warmth under the dry delivery of it. Real warmth. The kind that had been building slowly between them for months. And I find myself less interested in distance than I used to be. She felt her face warm, felt the particular nervous pleasure of being looked at like that by someone who chose his words as carefully as he did. "I've been thinking," she said. "About?" "About what you said. On the roof. That first time. That we don't have to move at the same speed." She looked at him directly. "I think I'm ready to move a little faster now." Something shifted in his expression. Careful hope replacing careful patience. "Are you certain?" "I'm not certain about everything," she said. "I don't know what this is going to look like, long term, with everything you are and everything I am, and the obvious math problem of one of us aging and one of us not. I don't have it figured out." "Neither do I," he said. "I've never had to figure it out before. I've never wanted to." She held his gaze. "But I know I don't want distance anymore," she said. "I spent my whole life keeping things at a distance to survive. I'd like to stop doing that with you." He reached out, slow and deliberate, and she let him, and his hand against her face was cool in the way she'd gotten used to, the way that no longer registered as strange, but just as him. "Ivy," he said, and her name in his voice still did the thing it had done that first night in the kitchen, landed somewhere warm in her chest. "I told you that you were home the day I opened that box. I didn't fully understand what I meant by it then. I think I do now." "What did you mean?" "I meant that I felt something the moment the box was set down. Before I even opened it. Something that told me this mattered. This specific delivery. This specific stranger inside it." He looked at her steadily. "I've learned to trust that feeling over the centuries. It's rarely wrong. It wasn't wrong about you." She felt tears threaten, not the kind from that first day, fear and exhaustion, but a different kind entirely. "I don't cry easily," she said again, the same thing she'd said that first night. "I remember," he said. "You can hear. Same as then." She let herself cry a little, and he didn't try to stop it or rush her through it, just stayed close, steady, present. "I love you," she said, when she'd gotten her voice back. "I think I have for a while. I just didn't trust myself to know what love was supposed to feel like, after everything." "I love you too," he said. "I've known longer than I let myself admit. There's a particular kind of foolishness in waiting centuries to learn patience, and then forgetting how to use it on the one thing that mattered." She laughed, wet and real. "That's a very long way of saying you were scared too." "Yes," he agreed. "That's exactly what it means." The city moved below them, indifferent and beautiful, and she leaned into him, finally, all the way, no careful distance left between them, and felt the particular piece of a system finally clicking into place, the way a box found its right destination after a long, uncertain journey. The trouble, when it came from a direction neither of them expected. It was early summer, almost a year since the box, and Ivy had settled fully into the rhythm of the warehouse and the rooftop evenings, and the slow, steady thing growing between her and Caspian. When a man showed up at the loading dock, asking specifically for her by name. She didn't recognize him at first. He was older than her stepfather, sharper looking, dressed in a way that suggested money rather than the rough edges Daniel Reyes always carried. He introduced himself as Holt, said he represented certain interests connected to her stepfather's family, and asked if they could speak privately. She said no. She'd learned that word fully in the past year, learned to use it without flinching. He smiled like her answer didn't matter, and said he'd wait until she changed her mind, then turned, and left without further explanation, which was somehow worse than if he'd pushed. Caspian found out, within the hour. He always did. "Holt," he said when she described the man. His expression went carefully blank in the way she now recognized as concealing something significant. "That's not a name I expected to hear again. You know him. I know what he represents." Caspian's jaw tightened slightly. "Your stepfather's family has connections he never told you about. Old money, Old grudges. Holt works for people who collect debts that predate your stepfather's involvement entirely. What kind of debts? The kind that don't expire when the person who incurred them dies or disappears. He looked at her steadily. Your stepfather owed people money. Significant money. People who don't write off losses easily. She felt cold despite the summer warmth, and now they think I'm worth something to collect against that debt. It's possible. Caspian's voice was even, but she could see the controlled tension in his shoulders, the careful stillness that meant he was holding something back. I won't let it come to that. You can't just promise that without knowing what you're up against. I can, he said simply, because I've spent 200 years learning exactly how to deal with people like Holt. This isn't new ground for me. She studied him. You sound very certain. I am certain. About this specifically. He reached for her hand, held it steady in his. Ivy, listen to me. You are not a debt to be collected. You are not currency in someone else's ledger. Whatever Holt thinks he's owed, it has nothing to do with you, and I will make that extremely clear. How? However it takes. His voice had gone quiet. The particular quiet that she'd learned meant something serious underneath it. I have resources you haven't seen yet. Connections that go back further than Holt's entire family line. This is not a fight I intend to lose. She believed him. That had become easier over the months. Believing him, because he never said things he didn't mean. Holt came back 3 days later, this time with 2 others, and Caspian met them in the lobby before they got further than the front desk. Ivy watched from the staircase above, close enough to hear, far enough to stay out of immediate reach the way Caspian had asked her to. Mr. Voss, Holt said, all smooth confidence. I understand you've taken an interest in protecting the Marsh girl. Her name is Ivy, Caspian said. And yes, the family she's connected to owes a significant sum. We're simply here to discuss reasonable arrangements. There's nothing to discuss. She owes nothing. The debt, if it exists, belongs to a man who is no longer in her life and has no claim on her whatsoever. Holt's smile thinned. That's not how these arrangements typically work. Mr. Voss debts follow family. Not in this building, Caspian said, and his voice had gone very still, very quiet, the kind of quiet that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Not with this woman. I'd suggest you take that information back to whoever sent you, along with a clear understanding that any further attempt to involve her in this matter will be treated as a direct threat against my household. I don't make that kind of statement lightly, and I don't make it twice. The room went very still. Holt's 2 companions exchanged a glance, the kind that suggested they understood something about Caspian that Holt apparently hadn't fully briefed them on. This is a significant debt, Holt tried again, though with less conviction. Then, collect it from the man who incurred it, Caspian said. Wherever he's gone. She is not available as a substitute. Holt held his gaze for a long moment, calculating something. And then, apparently deciding the calculation didn't favor pushing further, nodded once, sharp and final, and left without another word. His companions followed. Caspian stood in the empty lobby for a moment, then looked up at the staircase where Ivy was watching. Are you all right? He asked. She came down the stairs slowly. Was that real? Are they actually going to back off because you said a sentence? They'll do their research first. Find out exactly who I am and what I'm capable of, if they don't already know. He held out his hand and she took it. But yes, that sentence will hold. People like Holt understand exactly one language, and I just spoke it clearly. She felt the tension drain slowly out of her shoulders. I keep ending up needing rescuing. You don't need rescuing, he said, gently but firmly. You climbed into a box and rescued yourself. I just happened to be the one who opened it. Everything since then has been you building a life, not me saving you from one." She looked at him, this steady, strange creature who'd somehow become the center of everything good in her life since that first impossible day, and felt the last of the fear settle into something calmer. "Thank you," she said anyway, "for the sentence. For all of it. Always," he said. And meant it the way he meant everything. That evening on the rooftop, the relief of Holt's retreat still settling, Ivy found herself circling back to something that had been sitting quietly in her chest since the loading dock. How insane it was. How I almost didn't make it through those 11 hours. The doctor said another few hours, and the circulation in my legs might not have come back the same. She felt him go very still beside her, the way he did when something genuinely affected him. I think about how close that was to being a much worse story. "I think about it too," he admitted. "More than I'd like to. I felt something wrong before I opened it, but I didn't know how close it had come to being too late. That stays with me. Does it scare you? The thought of it?" "Yes," he said it simply, without trying to soften it. "I don't frighten easily, Ivy. I haven't in a very long time. But the thought of opening that box and finding something different, that frightens me considerably." She turned to look at him fully. "I'm glad you opened it. I'm glad I felt something wrong enough to come down myself," he said. "If I'd let someone else handle the delivery, if I hadn't trusted that instinct, don't," she said gently. "Don't go down that road. You did trust it. You did come down. Here we are." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly, accepting the redirection the way he'd learned to over the past year, trusting her judgment about when to let a thought go. "Here we are," he agreed. She settled back against him, watching the city lights flicker on one by one below them, thinking about how strange a life could turn out to be, how a single desperate decision made in a moment of pure terror could unfold into something this steady, this warm, this entirely unexpected. Caspian, yes, what happens now? Long term. The thing we haven't really talked about. She felt him tense slightly, the careful kind of tension that meant he'd been waiting for this question and wasn't entirely sure how to answer it. The fact that I'm going to age and you're not. The math of it. "I don't have a clean answer," he said honestly. "I've thought about it. More than I expected to, given how new this is. There are options, things I haven't fully explained yet, paths that exist for someone who chooses to walk them. I don't want to put that weight on you before you're ready to think about it. Tell me anyway. I want to know what the options are, even if I'm not deciding anything yet," he explained, carefully, the way he explained everything. The possibility that existed for a human to become something else entirely. The cost of it, the things it would mean to give up, and the things it would mean to gain. She listened without interrupting, filing it away the way she'd learned to file away large things until they found their right size in her mind. "That's a lot," she said, when he finished. "It is. I'm not asking you to decide anything. I just didn't want to keep it from you, the way things were kept from you before. You deserve every piece of information, even the difficult ones." She appreciated that more than she could easily say, the simple respect of being told the truth even when the truth was complicated. "Give me time," she said, "not because I'm scared of the answer, just because I want to actually think about it properly, not decide it in the middle of a conversation on a rooftop." "Take all the time you need," he said. "I've already told you, a year is nothing to me. Take 10, if that's what you need." She smiled against his shoulder. "You say that so easily." "Because it's easy to mean," he said. "The only thing that was ever hard was finding someone worth saying it to." Below them, the city kept turning its lights on, window by window, and she thought about the box again, briefly, the dark folded shape of those 11 hours. and then let the thought go. The way it faded a little more every time now, replaced by something steadier. Something that felt, increasingly, like the actual shape of home. Autumn came, and with it a kind of settling that Ivy hadn't expected to feel so completely. The warehouse work had become something she was genuinely good at, promoted twice in a year to running half the receiving operation, training new hires with the same patient methodical care she'd brought to fixing mislabeled pallets that first month. Caspian still found her on the rooftop most evenings, though now it was less about checking on her and more about simply wanting to be there, a habit built from a year of small, steady choices rather than any single dramatic moment. "You've changed," he told her one night, watching her direct 2 new employees through the warehouse window below them before they'd come up to the roof. "Good change or bad change?" "Good," he said immediately. "You walk differently. You used to walk like you were apologizing for taking up space. Now you walk like the space is yours." She considered that. "I think I finally believe it is." "You earned that belief," he said. "I didn't give it to you. I just opened a box. You did more than open a box. I gave you a place to stand while you figured it out yourself," he said. "That's different from giving you the belief directly. You built that part." She leaned against the railing, looking out at the city that had become, slowly and without her quite noticing the exact moment, the only place that had ever felt like it belonged to her, rather than the other way around. "I've been thinking about the thing you told me. The options." He went still beside her, the careful kind of stillness that meant he was bracing for something significant. "And? I don't think I'm ready to decide yet. I want to be honest about that." She turned to look at him. "But I don't think I'm scared of it the way I was when you first explained it. I think I just want to live a little more first, build more of this life before I think about what it might mean to extend it." "That's wise," he said, and she could hear the relief under the careful words, relief that she wasn't deciding against it, just deciding to wait. "Is that hard for you?" "Waiting. I've waited 2 centuries for someone worth waiting for," he said. "A few more years is nothing." "I told you that already." "You did." She smiled. "I just like hearing you say it again." He reached over and tucked a piece of her hair back, the same gesture he'd been doing for months now, familiar and grounding. "I'll say it as many times as you need to hear it," he said. "That's not difficult either." She thought about the version of herself who'd climbed into that box, desperate and terrified, with no plan beyond escape and no expectation beyond survival. That version of her hadn't known to hope for anything beyond getting out alive. She certainly hadn't known to hope for this: a rooftop, a steady hand, a voice that said true things even when they were incomplete, a home that had turned out to be a person rather than a place. "Caspian, yes, thank you for saying it." "That first day. You're home now." She held his gaze. "I don't think I understood then how much I needed someone to say that to me. Not as a kindness, as a fact." "I meant it as a fact," he said. "I still do." "I know," she said. "That's why it mattered." The city lights spread out below them, endless and warm, and she thought about all the small, unremarkable Tuesdays that had built this life, one careful brick at a time. And she found, to her own quiet surprise, that she was no longer afraid of how it might end, only curious about how much further it might go. He pulled her close, and she let him. No careful distance left between them at all, just the steady warmth of someone who had opened a box on a loading dock and changed everything without ever once asking her to be anything other than exactly who she already was. The first frost came early that year, and with it Caspian announced a formal dinner he'd been putting off for months, not a romantic one. He clarified when Ivy raised an eyebrow, but a necessary one, with several of his oldest associates from the other cities, people who'd helped build the network she now understood she was a part of. "They'll want to meet you," he said. "They've heard the story already. Everyone has. The box story." The box story. Something dry moved at the corner of his mouth. It's become something of a legend in certain circles. The girl who shipped herself to Caspian Voss and made him break his own rule about never getting personally involved. She felt herself flush. I didn't make you do anything. No. He agreed. You didn't make me. I chose it. But the story doesn't always get that nuance right when it travels. The dinner was in a private room, 2 floors below the rooftop. Long table, low candlelight. Faces she didn't recognize but who all seemed, in some way she couldn't quite define, to recognize her. An older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes introduced herself as Margit, said she'd run the network's western branch for almost a century, and looked at Ivy with an assessing expression that wasn't unkind, but wasn't soft either. So you're the box, Margit said. I prefer Ivy. Something flickered across Margit's face. Approval, maybe, or amusement. Good, he needs someone who corrects him. Does he need correcting often? Constantly, he just doesn't get corrected often, because most people are too afraid of him to try. Margit glanced down the table to where Caspian was deep in conversation with someone else, his expression more open than Ivy had ever seen it in front of strangers. You don't seem afraid of him. I was, the first day. He opened a box, and I'd never seen anyone move like that. Ivy considered it. But fear and afraid aren't quite the same thing, are they? I was afraid of the situation. I don't think I was ever afraid of him. Margit studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like Ivy had passed some test she hadn't been told she was taking. He's been alone a long time, she said, quieter now. Longer than is good for someone like him. We worried, some of us, that he'd stay that way. And now? Now I watch him laugh at something you said from across a room, and I think the worry might have been wasted. Margit picked up her glass. Take care of him. He's not as unbreakable as he looks. Ivy thought about that for the rest of the dinner, turned it over while the conversation moved around her, formal and warm in equal measure, full of references to decades and cities she didn't know, but was slowly starting to map. Later, on the rooftop again, just the two of them, she brought it up. Margit said you're not as unbreakable as you look. Caspian was quiet for a moment. Margit says a lot of things. Is she wrong? He considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything. No, he admitted, she's not wrong. I've been breakable exactly once before, when Elise stopped himself, the name slipping out unguarded, and Ivy felt something shift. A door she hadn't known was there, cracking slightly open. Who's Elise? He was quiet for a long moment, and she let the silence sit, the way she'd learned to with him, not pushing. Someone I loved a very long time ago, he said finally, before I learned the kind of distance that kept me whole afterward. I haven't said her name out loud in decades. You don't have to tell me. I know I don't have to. He looked at her, something raw and old in his expression. But I think I want to, if you're willing to hear it. I'm willing, she said. I want to know all of you, Caspian, the parts before me too. He nodded slowly and began, quiet and careful, the long story he'd kept, folded away for longer than she could properly imagine, and she listened the way he'd listened to her that first week. Completely, without rushing him through any part of it. He told her about Elise slowly, the way someone walks into cold water, a little at a time, testing how much it hurt before going further. Elise had been a seamstress in a city that didn't exist anymore under that name, back when his own name had been different too, back before the network, before the warehouses, before he'd learned to build things that could outlast a single human lifetime. She used to complain that my hands were always cold, he said. Even back then, before she knew what I was. She said it like a joke, mostly cold hands, warm heart, that sort of thing people say without meaning anything by it. Did she find out what you were? Eventually, I told her, the way I told you, mostly because I was tired of editing myself around her. She didn't run. He looked at the city lights, his voice gone distant in the way it did when he was somewhere else, decades back, walking streets that had been paved over a dozen times since. She said it explained a few things and asked if I'd still walk her home in the rain. That was the whole reaction. No drama. Just logistics. Ivy smiled despite the weight of the story. That sounds like something I'd say. I noticed the similarity early, he admitted. It frightened me, honestly. I'd spent so long telling myself I wouldn't do this again. And then you climbed into a box, practical and stubborn about it, and I kept hearing echoes I didn't expect to hear. What happened to her? He was quiet for a long moment. Sickness, the kind that had no name back then, just fever and exhaustion, and a slow fading that I couldn't stop no matter what I tried. His jaw was tight. I offered her the choice, the same choice I explained to you. She said no. Why, she said she didn't want eternity if it meant watching everyone she loved die while she stayed the same. She said it would turn love into a kind of grief you carried forward, instead of back. He looked at Ivy. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Ivy reached for his hand. Is that why you've never offered it to anyone else? Until me. I told myself I'd never offer it again at all, he said. And then I broke that rule within a year of meeting you, which tells you something about how much that rule was actually built to last. She held his hand tighter. I'm not her. Calum. Caspian. She caught herself on the wrong name. An old habit from rereading the other story too many times in her head, and laughed a little at her own mistake. I'm not going to make the same choice she made. I don't know what I'll choose yet, but I know it won't be decided by what she chose. That's not fair to either of us. I know that, he said. I've known it since the warehouse, honestly. You've never once reminded me of her in any way that mattered. You remind me of yourself. That's been the entire point. She leaned into his shoulder, feeling the cool, solid weight of him, familiar now in a way that no longer surprised her. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for asking, he said. I don't think I would have. Otherwise, some doors stay shut longer than they should if no one knocks. Winter settled into the city slowly, the kind of cold that made the warehouse feel warmer by comparison, full of bodies moving and machines humming, and the steady rhythm of work that Ivy had come to love without ever quite expecting to. She'd been there almost 2 years now. The girl who'd folded herself into a box felt like someone she remembered rather than someone she still was, though she never fully let go of her, because forgetting felt like a kind of disrespect to how hard that girl had fought. Caspian found new ways to surprise her that winter, small things mostly. He learned, somewhere along the way, that she liked a particular tea that the warehouse cafeteria didn't carry, and one morning there was a small tin of it on her desk, with no note. Because he never needed a note to tell her things, he just did them, and let her notice. He started attending the morning briefings she ran for new hires, standing quietly at the back, not interrupting, just present. The way he'd been present since the very first night. You don't have to sit through inventory training, she told him once, amused, after he'd spent 40 minutes listening to her explain the labeling system to 3 new employees. I like watching you do this, he said. You're good at it. Patient in a way most people aren't with people who are still learning. I remember what it's like not knowing anything. I had a lot of practice not knowing things. You learned fast. I had good motivation. He smiled at that. The easy, real smile that had become more common over the months, less rare and careful than it had been that first year. I have something to ask you, he said, the tone shifting slightly, careful in a different way now. That sounds ominous. It's not meant to be. He took her hand, the gesture familiar now, but somehow charged in a new way. I've been thinking about the dinner, about Margit, about the others, about how they all already think of you as part of this, part of the network, part of my life in a way that doesn't have an official shape yet. What kind of shape are you thinking? I'd like to make it formal, he said. Not a wedding in the human sense, necessarily, though that's an option too if you want it. But formal, within the network. A bonding, they call it. It means something specific among people like me, a public acknowledgement that you're under my protection permanently. That any debt or threat against you is a debt or threat against me directly. No negotiation, no ambiguity. She considered that carefully. Is that different from what already exists between us? Legally and socially, yes. Emotionally, perhaps not as much. But I want the world to know it the way I know it. He held her gaze. I want Holt's people, and anyone like them who might come looking in the future, to understand immediately, and without question, what they're dealing with. She turned the idea over, testing its weight the way she'd learned to test everything important now, slowly, without rushing. And the human wedding part. Would that come too, if you want it? I know it matters to you in a way the bonding alone might not. I'd like both, honestly. The legal kind for the part of you that grew up believing in it, and the other kind for the part of our life that needs the protection. She smiled slowly. You've thought about this a lot. I've thought about very little else for the past month, he admitted. I wanted to be sure before I asked. And are you? Sure, completely, he said. I haven't been sure of anything this thoroughly and longer than you'd believe. She looked at him, this steady creature who'd opened a cardboard box on a loading dock and somehow, impossibly, turned himself into the safest place she'd ever stood. Yes, she said. Both kinds. I want both. The bonding ceremony happened in early spring, almost exactly 2 years after the box, in the same rooftop space where they'd spent so many evenings talking through everything that mattered. Margaret officiated, her sharp eyes softer than Ivy had ever seen them, and the gathered crowd was smaller than Ivy expected, but somehow more significant for it, the people who'd actually built and held this strange network together over decades. People who'd helped others disappear from situations exactly like the one she'd escaped. She wore blue, not white, because Caspian once said blue reminded him of something peaceful. The ceremony was simple, a formal exchange of intent witnessed by the group, and near the end Caspian cut his own palm and pressed it briefly to hers. An old gesture, older than the network itself, meaning shared protection. This means, he said to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the rooftop, that Ivy is under my protection absolutely, permanently, and without exception. Any harm intended toward her is harm intended toward me, and will be answered as such. Margaret spoke next, the formal closing words of whatever ceremony this was, old and slightly strange in their phrasing, but carrying weight Ivy could feel even without fully understanding every word. When it ended, the gathered group didn't cheer exactly, but there was a warmth in their applause that felt different from polite obligation. Felt like genuine happiness for two people they'd watched build something real out of an impossible beginning. You did that beautifully, Caspian murmured to her afterward, as the group dispersed slowly into the warm spring evening, plates of food and quiet conversation spreading across the rooftop. I didn't do much. You did most of the talking. You stood there exactly the way you needed to. Steady, unafraid. He looked at her with the openness that still occasionally caught her off guard, even after 2 years of learning his face. The way you've been standing since the moment I opened that box. She leaned into him, watching the gathered crowd, people from cities she'd never visited, lives she'd only heard about in fragments, all connected by this strange quiet work of helping people escape the unescapable. Margaret told me something at the first dinner, she said. She said you weren't as unbreakable as you looked. She likes saying that. I think she enjoys reminding me I'm not as composed as I pretend to be. Is it true? Right now, in this moment. He considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything. Right now, he said, I think I might be the most breakable I've ever been. Because right now I have something I could lose, in a way I haven't allowed myself to have in longer than you'd believe. That sounds like a vulnerability, not a strength. It is a vulnerability, he agreed. I've decided it's worth it anyway. I decided that the moment I felt something wrong with that delivery and went down to the dock myself instead of sending someone else. She smiled, thinking back to that moment. The box, the tape being cut, the light, the 4 words that had changed everything. You're home now, she said quietly. I meant it then, he said. I mean it more now. The spring evening settled around them, warm and full of the particular gold light that came right before dusk, and somewhere below them, the warehouse sat quiet for the night, full of carefully labeled boxes waiting to be sent somewhere they were needed, the same way one box, 2 years ago, had been sent somewhere it turned out to be needed too. Though neither the sender nor the receiver had known it at the time, years moved differently once you stopped counting them the way you used to. Ivy noticed this slowly, the way the months blurred into seasons, and the seasons blurred into something that felt less like time passing, and more like a life simply continuing, steady and full. Built brick by brick out of ordinary Tuesdays rather than dramatic turning points. She was 31, when she finally made the decision she'd been turning over since that first conversation on the rooftop, the one about options and choices, and the math of one person aging while another stayed exactly the same. She hadn't rushed it. Caspian hadn't asked her to. She'd lived a full decade of warehouse mornings and rooftop evenings, and slow accumulating trust before she brought it up again. This time with the clarity of someone who'd actually tested the weight of the question against an entire life, rather than a single terrified night. I've decided, she told him, on the rooftop again, because it seemed right that the big conversations always happened in that same place, the place that had become, over the years, the truest version of home either of them had. He went very still, the careful stillness that meant something significant was about to be discussed. Tell me. I want it. The choice you offered. Not right now, necessarily. Not this year even. But eventually. I've thought about what it means to give up the parts of being human that I'll lose, and I've thought about what it means to gain the parts of being like you that I'd gain, and I keep arriving at the same answer. Which is, that I don't want this to end, she said simply. Not because I'm afraid of it ending the way Elise was afraid of watching everyone she loved fade while she stayed the same. I understand that fear. I respect it completely. But my fear runs the other direction. I'm afraid of ending while you keep going, of leaving you with decades or centuries of grief over someone who chose distance out of caution rather than choosing closeness out of courage. He was quiet for a long moment, processing, the way he processed everything important, fully and without rushing. Are you certain? He said finally. Truly certain. Not certain because you think it's what I want, or what's expected, but certain because it's what you actually want for yourself. I'm certain, she said. I've spent 10 years testing this certainty against every doubt I could find, and it kept holding. That's how I know it's real. He reached for her hand, the familiar weight of his fingers around hers, cool and steady the way they'd been since that very first warehouse afternoon. Then, yes, he said. Whenever you're ready. There's no rush on my end either, but I want you to know the answer is yes, completely, without hesitation. She smiled, feeling something settle fully into place. A decision that had been building for a decade finally finding its right shape. Not tonight, she said, but soon. I want to feel certain about the timing too, not just the decision. Take whatever time you need, he said, the same words he'd said on this same rooftop a decade ago, still true. still easy for him to mean. I've already told you, time means something different to me than it does to you. I can wait for exactly the moment that feels right. She leaned into him, looking out at the city that had become, over a decade, more completely hers than any place she'd lived, before the box, before the warehouse, before this strange, impossible life that had started with an act of pure desperation and turned, slowly, and without either of them planning it, into the steadiest thing either of them had ever built. Caspian, yes. Thank you for opening the box yourself. I'll never stop being glad I did, he said, and pulled her closer, the city lights spreading out below them in their familiar endless pattern, and somewhere in the warehouse beneath them another box sat on a loading dock, waiting to be opened, carrying inside it someone else's desperate hope, someone else's impossible plan, someone else's chance at finding, against every reasonable expectation, that they had finally, somehow, arrived home. The night it happened was quieter than Ivy expected, less dramatic than the stories she'd half imagined from old films and books, more like the rest of their relationship had been careful, deliberate, full of small, honest moments rather than sweeping gestures. They did it in the apartment they'd built together over the years, the one with the rooftop access, surrounded by the ordinary furniture of an ordinary life that happened to belong to two extraordinary people. Tell me if you want to stop, Caspian said, his voice steady, but his eyes carrying a weight she'd rarely seen in them, at any point. This isn't a door that closes the moment we start. I know, she said. I'm not going to want to stop. She was right about that. Afterward, in the strange, disoriented hours that followed, she understood things about herself she hadn't expected to understand so immediately, a clarity of senses, a different relationship to time, a quiet, steady strength that settled fully into her body like something that had always belonged there and was simply, finally, being allowed to surface. How do you feel? Caspian asked, watching her carefully as she sat up, testing her own balance, her own new weight in the world. Different, she said. But not as different as I expected. Like I've just learned a new language for something I already understood. He smiled at that, the easy, real smile, relief moving visibly through him in a way he didn't try to hide. That's exactly how Margit described it once. A new language for something already understood. Is she the one who taught you that phrase? She's the one who taught me most things, over the centuries. She'll want to see you, once you've settled. She's been waiting for this conversation almost as long as I have. Ivy looked around the apartment, familiar and yet seen now through eyes that registered light and shadow and detail differently than they had that morning. The plant on the windowsill, the one Caspian had named after Elise years ago when Ivy had asked him to, sat exactly where it always sat, thriving in its 60-plus years of careful tending. She found herself, oddly, thinking about that plant in this strange new moment, about continuity, about the things that outlasted ordinary timelines when given enough care. I want to see the warehouse, she said. Tonight, if that's allowed. I want to see it like this. It's allowed, Caspian said. Nothing about tonight requires you to stay inside these walls, if you're steady enough to move. She was steady. They went down together, through the building she'd arrived at 2 years ago, folded inside a cardboard box, barely able to walk, and now walked through upright and clear-eyed, and entirely herself, in a way she'd never quite managed before. The warehouse floor was quiet at this hour, rows of labeled boxes waiting for morning, the same orderly system that had given her peace from her very first week here. She stopped at the loading dock, the exact spot where the box had been set down 2 years ago, where Caspian had cut the tape and looked down at her and said 4 words that had rewritten the entire shape of her life. This is where it started, she said. This is where it started, he agreed, standing beside her, his hand finding hers in the quiet dark of the warehouse, steady and certain the way it had always been. "You're home now," she said, repeating his own words back to him, testing how they sounded from this new angle, this new permanence. "You're home now," he agreed, more completely than either of us understood, that first day. She looked at the loading dock, at the quiet rows of waiting boxes, at the life that had built itself slowly and deliberately out of a single desperate act of escape, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, no fear at all about what came next. Caspian remained exactly himself through all of it, steady, careful, occasionally dry in a way that still caught her off guard after all the years, still finding new things to learn about her even decades into a life built together. The rooftop remained their place, the spot where the big conversations happened, where they'd return again and again across the years to mark the things that mattered. On the 30th anniversary of the box, they stood there together, looking out at a city that had changed considerably around them. New buildings replacing old ones, the skyline shifting in the slow way cities shifted when you had the patience to watch it happen over decades rather than years. 30 years, Ivy said, leaning into him, feeling the same cool, steady weight she'd felt that very first night in the warehouse kitchen, except now it was simply familiar rather than strange, simply him rather than something she was still learning to understand. 30 years, he agreed. I've lived considerably longer than that, obviously, but I find these 30 mean more than most of the others combined. Why? Because before you, I was simply continuing, he said, existing, building, surviving across centuries without much of a reason beyond habit and obligation. Since you, I've actually been living. There's a difference, and I didn't fully understand it until I had both versions to compare. She smiled, thinking about the girl who'd climbed into a cardboard box with nothing but desperation and a half-formed plan, who'd had no way of knowing that the building she was shipping herself toward held not just safety, but an entire unexpected life, stretching forward now into a future that no longer had a clear edge. "I'm glad I picked your building," she said. "I'm glad I felt something wrong with that delivery," he said. "I'm glad I came down to the dock myself instead of sending someone else. I'm glad every single day that I opened that box." She turned to look at him fully, this steady creature who'd become, over 30 years, the entire architecture of her life, and felt the same warm, settled certainty she'd felt on every rooftop evening since that very first impossible day. "You're still home," she said. "Both of us. Each other." "Yes," he agreed, pulling her close as the city lights spread out below them in their endless familiar pattern. "Exactly that. Each other."